sat in front of my laptop, with my hands hovering over the keys. Could I talk to my sister about something like this over an email? Heaven knows, I could never say these things to her face. She would think I had gone insane. But then, maybe I was insane. What I had to say would make even the most convincing man alive sound like a lunatic. But I had to tell her. I had to tell her about Amy. Amy was my 3-year-old niece. She wore long brunette braids, and whenever I saw her, my sister had dressed her up like a doll. Anyway, my sister was going away for a little weekend vacation and had asked me if Amy could stay with me for 2 or 3 nights. During the day, she would be at daycare, and I would pick her up in the late afternoon, feed her dinner, and put her to bed. It sounded simple enough, so I agreed. Actually, somewhat excited to spend some time with my little niece. So, the next day, I stepped outside my front door with a fluffy new stuffed animal in my hands and a smile on my face as my sister opened the door of her car and unbuckled the little girl from her car seat. Amy scurried out of the car and ran to me, hugging my legs and laughing that shrill, sweet little voice. Her dark braids whipped about as she ran, and her little red button dress flared with the wind as she leapt out of the car seat. I picked her up and gave her the stuffed animal, a little kitten plushie with big eyes. My sister said her goodbyes and told Amy to be good and listen to me. Amy only half listened as she played with her new stuffed animal. I took the small suitcase from my sister's back seat, which contained some of Amy's clothes, and she handed me the little girl's art set. I laughed as I found it to be heavier than the suitcase, and later I found it to be packed full of colored pencils, markers, crayons, blank paper, pens, and even some bottles of paint. But I had forbidden her to use the paint inside of the house. Along with her drawing supplies were some of her half-scribbled, half-smeared drawings. I could see what appeared to be trees, some stick figures, what looked like a drawing of her house. Nothing out of the ordinary, just what you would expect from a 3-year-old. But to her, these were treasures, and she treated each of her drawings with pride. So by the end of the day, my refrigerator was covered, every inch of it, with those masterpieces. And when it was finally time for bed, I tucked her in and told her one of the few children's stories that I knew, and turned out the light. She went to bed without any trouble. I, however, found sleep to be impossible. I had tossed and turned in my bed for a good hour before I gave up and wandered into the kitchen. I fixed myself a bowl of cereal and sat down at the table with my laptop and began browsing the internet, looking for some sort of entertainment. But by the time I had emptied half of my bowl of cereal, I had been puzzled by a strange sound. It sounded like voices, and I thought it was the neighbors. I was angry at how much noise they were making, since I could hear it from my kitchen. But as I got up to confront them and made my way toward the back door, I stopped as I passed by Amy's bedroom door, realizing that the sound was coming from inside. She was talking, not in the childish way that children narrate their games and toys' voices to themselves, but she sounded as though she were having a conversation with someone. "Amy," I called through the door, and I heard the sound of pencils rattling, as though I had startled her into dropping the art set. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, putting my ear to the door. She called back in a shrill voice, "To Claire, Auntie." Claire. I knew this name. My sister had warned me that Amy had an imaginary friend named Claire, whom she played with at strange hours of the night. Amy would sometimes wake up and suddenly have the urge to start drawing, and when she did, she would imagine a playmate to keep her company. I was told that this was completely normal for children her age, but something about the way Amy had been talking to her imaginary friend made my blood run cold. I twisted the doorknob and pushed the door open. Inside, I saw Amy sitting on the floor with her legs crossed as she leaned over a new drawing. She gazed up at me with a confused expression as I looked around the room for any sign of another person. Finally, I met her eyes and told her that I was just checking, and asked her to go back to bed when she had finished that drawing. She nodded deeply and promised that she would. Only 3 years old, and yet she was keeping later hours than I was. It couldn't be healthy for a child, but her mother had instructed me to allow it if it had come up, stating that Amy will not be able to sleep until her drawing is finished. As I closed the door, I heard her little voice continue speaking, talking about her new toy kitten, her afternoon at the daycare, and about me. I listened as she told her imaginary friend about me, what I looked like, what I did for a living, what I ate, what I wore, everything. And I listened, unable to pry myself away from the door. And after several minutes of eavesdropping, I heard the cover of her art box click shut, and the light under her door went black. She had finally gone to bed. I made my way silently to my room, my mind still racing as I recalled some of the things she had said. I got very little sleep that night, but the next morning I awoke somewhat refreshed. I hurried into the kitchen, pulling out the frying pan and the toaster, and I started cooking breakfast for the two of us. As I cracked an egg over the pan, I remembered the sound of the art box clicking shut last night, and then I remembered the conversation Amy had shared with her imaginary friend Claire. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it just as what my sister had called it, imaginary. But my faith was shaken as I saw Amy walking into the kitchen, or trudging might have been a better word for it, as she carried her art box in her hands. Her eyes were directed at the ground as she walked, and her lips were pressed together in a pout as she laid her box on top of the dining room table and pulled herself up onto a chair. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, as I watched her slowly opening her art box and rummaging through the papers. "I'm sad." "Why are you sad?" I noticed that she was clutching a piece of paper in her hand. "What have you got there?" She laid the paper down flat on the table and revealed a new drawing. But this one, it was different. It was dark and horrible, and yet it was more detailed than anything I could have ever drawn. And then I realized this was a drawing of Amy, and she was... Oh my gosh. I picked up the drawing and crumpled it in my hands. "Why did you draw this?" "I didn't," she said flatly. "Amy, this is serious," I said, looking her sternly in the eye. But as I looked at her in the eye, I could see the fear in them, and I knew she wasn't lying. Without another word, I grabbed Amy's hand and ran for the door, snatching up my purse as I passed by the counter. I drove us to a nearby hotel and checked us in for the night. Amy is in bed across the room now, and I have been watching over her closely as I sat with my laptop in front of me, trying to find the words to contact my sister to tell her what had happened. In my hurry, I hadn't thrown away the drawing, and now it lay beside my laptop, a bit crumpled, but still intact. Her mother would have to see it. This was the only proof that I had that this Claire was real. Amy could not draw anything like this. Never. This would be all the proof I needed. But I lost that proof. For the next morning, when I awoke from a deep sleep after sending my sister my finished email, I looked beside my laptop to find that the drawing was gone. I checked beneath the bed, in all of our bags, and I even interrogated Amy, but it was just gone. That was the last I ever heard of Claire, and Amy never mentioned it again. I think we were both too scared to say anything. To my luck, I had forgotten to hit send on my email, and so my sister never learned anything about what had happened. After all, there was no proof, just the hazy memory of a drawing that has haunted my nightmares for the years that followed that night. I have never forgotten that drawing. And sometimes I wonder if Amy still remembers her playmate. Or more, I wonder some nights if Claire misses Amy. Probably not, though. After all, she never seemed to have missed me. It had been over 30 years since we had played together, back when that little art box was mine, and Claire was my best friend.